This is a Black Nouveau web exclusive. As part of this year's Juneteenth celebration, America's Black Holocaust Museum held its opening ceremony for its new building. Danny Glover was the guest speaker. Here's part 2 of that interview.
I think we have to understand that history and understand the relationship of that history and now. History doesn't lie isolated. It doesn't lie this moment is not connected to the next moment. All these moments connect each other. You take in my city where I was born and raised, San Francisco. During the 1934 strike, a great labor leader, Harry Bridges, who was the president and organizer of the ILWU Local 10, and that was longshoremen workers. What he did was I think, progressive in a sense. He went around to all the black churches. This is before there was a Golden Gate Bridge and before there was a Bay Bridge. He went to all the black churches and he said, if you don't cross the picket lines, if you don't become scabs on our strike, I promise you, when we win, and the operative word was we will win, that black men will be on the docks when we win. And they won. And black men went on the docks. And the generation, 2, 3 generations of African Americans who come and worked on the docks. As a result of that statement, those are real changes that happen. And it's it's important historically to understand that as well. So when we speak about history in this sense, and understanding the patterns of history, the dynamics of history. W. Du Bois said also the question of the 20th century, and this is in 1900 at the first Pan-African Congress there, the question of the 20th century is going to be the question of race. And he was not just talking about people of African descent. He was talking to people of Asiatic descent. He was talking to people who of Middle Eastern descent. He said the question of the 20th century is going to be the question of race. When Dr. King said the three triplets of war, militarism and materialism are what we have to deal with and deal with. We have ongoing wars here. What have wars have done traditionally? Wars have sapped and taken the resources that need to go for human development, community development, and use those resources for the armament industry and all those things. All these are understandable. And we have to begin to look at this country and the intersection of all these things. Extreme poverty is a political choice. It is not some sort of economic science to that. It is a political choice. This country right here spends less than any other developed nation in the world on what I call public social spending. What does that mean? On education? What does that in terms of education? What does that mean in terms of job production, job creation, and everything? It spends that money. When I worked for the Office of Community Development, the Model City program in San Francisco for 6.5 years in 1971, we knew how many jobs we were going to have that summer. We knew in the Baby Hunters Point, in the Mission District, traditionally black community and the Hispanic community, what resources were available to create jobs in there. We had programs. We had some of the most dynamic community leaders. I'm talking about 47 years ago. Eloise Westbrook, Espanola Jackson. These women are heroes. They are my heroes. Those are the ones who took this young kid out of college and began to teach him and learn from them and everything else. So on the sense, that has been a dynamic that's happened around this country. What we see now, what we see in terms of poverty among children, we see also those things about the issues of health care and the access to health care. We see gentrifications happening in every single city. I've lived in the same neighborhood in the city that I was born in since I was 11 years old. I lived 12 blocks from where I grew up, and it's changed. A neighborhood that was primarily African American, that you can find myself as accounting one of the few African Americans living in that neighborhood. That's a reality. That's the determinant. But those are political decisions. When I was working in city government, I saw what planning do. They knew even before it was the Moscone Center, when he was tragically murdered in 1978, they knew that they were going to build a complex down there and remove all those poor people, all those people who broken people, all those people who had no access to services. They knew that they were going to be the ones who were going to be the victims of what happened. What do we do with the most vulnerable is the history that we have to make.
And that's
the history we have to talk about.
That's the next question I got for you. Because when Danny get going, we might have to just get a little more comfortable.
I'm sorry, in a sense. This is all really respected, and like I said, I'm thankful that everyone is here to talk about the real issues that we have. I consider myself a community development. I maybe find my life on the screen and everything else, but when I come to communities like this, wherever they are, whether they're in the world, and let me remind you, I'm the Goodwill Ambassador for not only UNICEF, but I am the special Goodwill Ambassador for this decade of African descendants. Who knows about this decade of African descendants? You know, so the issues in the Caribbean, the issues in the Caribbean with CARICOM are the issues of reparations. Right there, right up front, every single leader in the Caribbean countries in CARICOM has signed on to letters to the original colonizers, the British, the French, and everything else, demanding reparations. That's surreal, in a sense. So how do we contextualize that? When we talk about the number of African descendants, the largest grouping of African descendants is where? Brazil. Over 100 million people are self-defined African descendants in Brazil. Where else? Here, Canada, there are more than 200 million people of African descent in this southern and northern hemisphere. And 90% of them live in poverty. Those are the realities. We have, again, in Costa Rica, just last month, the first woman, Essie Campbell, to be elected vice president of a country in this hemisphere. African descendant. We have all these different dynamics that are happening around us. We have to pay attention and understand how those dynamics are related to us as well, and what impact that has on not only our public policy here, but also the impact it has on foreign policy for our country as well.
Thank you. Y'all want to applause for that?